150 miles southeast of Rome and 30 miles west of Pompeii is the town of Pozzuoli. It has one of the best preserved subterranean structures of any amphitheater in the Roman world. I met with Katie Parla, an expert on the Pozzuoli Amphitheater.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
Grazie.
As gladiator fights grew in popularity, the show around them became more and more spectacular and bizarre. Beneath this massive arena is evidence of how the spectacle of gladiator games was engineered. The complex and sophisticated mechanisms used to create the ultimate fighting experience of ancient Rome.
So right away, a vast structure, but half of what it was.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're looking at just a fraction of the original height, which would have been nearly 150 feet.
Now, so compared to the Colosseum in Rome, how big is this?
Well, the Colosseum's capacity was between 50 and 60,000.
Yeah.
The capacity here was between 30 and 40,000.
Like other major arenas in ancient Rome, Pozzuoli was designed and built with gladiator games in mind. In fact, the word arena comes from the Latin word for the sand, which was poured on the floor to soak up gladiators' blood.
Okay. So we're entering into the amphitheater just as the gladiators would have?
Exactly. This is one of the monumental entrances. We're at one end of the long axis of this elliptical arena. Now we're on stage level.
It's a huge amphitheater. Wow.
These holes that you see here, now covered in iron grates, actually would have been wooden platforms. These would have been trapdoors that communicated with the amphitheater's substructure.
So down below, there's a whole world of backstage, essentially.
It's complex, it's 2 stories high, and hundreds of people would have been at work.
Gladiators, the rest of them down there, the wild beasts and all the rest.
Sure.
And so up here, you have cheering people, the cheering masses having a great time at the show. Down there, people are getting ready to die.
Gladiators from small towns around the Roman world would have been brought below this arena, then forced to fight for their lives on this surreal stage.
How deep is this right here?
About 20 feet, 2 Roman stories.
The arena is up here. This is the main conduit for all the major stage work that's going on.
That's right, all the stage scenery would have been sort of hoisted up or jacked up onto the stage floor.
Like the Colosseum in Rome and other major arenas throughout the empire, this arena was built with a massive substructure. It was 2 stories high and designed around 2 intersecting axes. The main axis would have been used to hoist up large props and full-scale stage scenery for the wild beast hunts. And more than 20 trapdoors would have been used to introduce gladiators or animals into the show above. Hundreds of backstage workers would have been operating these mechanisms amid the roar of lions.
If I'm a gladiator, this is most of my existence. I wait down here in the madness, in the dark, hearing the screaming crowd waiting for me to pop up there. Down here is where I live. Up there is where I die.
Many of the chambers beneath the stands would have held gladiator weapons. Weapons were only handed to the gladiators immediately before the fight. It was a practice that started after perhaps the most famous gladiator of all started a revolt that shook the empire.
Spartacus was a Thracian slave who was forced into the gladiator school in Capua. He was actually sold in a market in Rome where the owners of gladiator schools would go and look for the best specimens.
Starting with a band of 80 like-minded warriors, Spartacus escaped from gladiator school in nearby Capua by seizing knives from the school's kitchen and a wagon full of weapons. Eventually, he raised an army of more than 120,000 men, mostly slaves. For 2 years, they slaughtered everything the Romans threw at them, until they were finally outnumbered by the Roman legions, and Spartacus himself was killed. To punish them, the emperor had the rebels impaled on stakes along the Via Appia. After that, emperors handled their trained killing machines a little differently.
The owners of the gladiator schools had to be much more careful about how they caged their gladiators, how they trained them. They had to give them their weaponry just before they went on stage rather than giving it to them when they were in their barracks.
You would have thought that that would have just put an end to gladiator sport.
Absolutely not. It's like canceling all soccer matches for eternity in Italy. I mean, that would cause riots.
A huge revolt.
Worse than the Spartacus one.
Up next,
Look at this.
an off-limits tunnel deep beneath the Pozzuoli Arena.
So we're probably like 30 feet below where the public would have sat to watch the gladiator games. And we're going out of the stadium, under the streets of Pozzuoli.
And later, a town on the verge of collapse reveals a dirty secret.
They used to consider this area the Las Vegas of nowadays.
In the bowels of the Pozzuoli Arena are the unseen apparatus that engineered the awesome and bizarre spectacle of gladiator games. From trapdoors where gladiators or wild beasts would surprise their enemies, to elaborate stage scenery that was hoisted up out of the arena floor. These underground staging areas had turned gladiator games into the greatest and bloodiest show on Earth.
You know, we're in the bottommost part of the structure here, and they would have to be lifting enormous objects, people, animals, everything into this arena above them. So to do that, you needed a pulley system. And they're all over the place. That's how complex this is. That's how hard it is to put on this show. The lengths they've gone to for a twisted experience.
A day at Pozzuoli usually followed a predictable schedule of mayhem and gore. In the morning, animal hunts. Then, after lunch and some wine, were public executions and the main event, gladiator battles, often fought to the death. For the men who were forced into this life, the spectacle was awesome and terrifying. But as elaborate as the scenery was, the show came down to a bloody battle. There were usually a few dozen pairs of gladiators matched up against each other. But for major events like the celebration of a military victory, emperors would gather as many as 5,000 pairs of gladiators who would fight over 4 months. The game organizers, or editors, added more and more extravagant shows to accompany the gladiator fights. In fact, many experts believe, like the Colosseum, Pozzuoli Amphitheater was flooded to recreate naval battles. And a clue to support this theory lies in an off-limits, dark tunnel at the end of the short axis.
This is supposedly the water tunnel that would have filled up the amphitheater with water for the naval reenactments. Oh, this is neat. So we're probably like 30 feet below where the public would have sat to watch the gladiator games. And we're going out of the stadium, under the streets of Pozzuoli. Look at this. Down that way. The whole thing just tees off. And down that way. Let's see what happens down here. We're inside of an underground aqueduct designed to bring great volumes of water into an amphitheater that sat 30,000 people. It gives you a clue as to how sophisticated the Roman Empire really is at this time. They are not only operating an empire of vast proportions, but they are vastly entertaining their own citizens.
Even though the games that took place here in Pozzuoli included naval battles, wild beast hunts, and executions, the gladiators were always the fan favorite and the biggest moneymakers. They often made their owners and managers extremely wealthy, so when the gladiators needed to let off a little steam, they were given special permission to go across town, to Pozzuoli's hidden red light district. I met up with a Pozzuoli local, Antimo Di Domenico, who has walked these cobblestone streets since he was a little boy. Pozzuoli, or as it was called in ancient Rome, Puteoli, is located in the Phlegraean Fields, a seismically active area including Mount Vesuvius, the volcano that devoured Pompeii, and sits literally in the shadow of the Solfatara volcano. Because of the constantly shifting ground here, the hillside has begun to crumble. But the seismic destruction also revealed a large section of the buried city, including Puteoli's ancient red light district. Accessible through the old city hall are the remains of the 1st century Pozzuoli.
We go in here?
Yes, this way.
And a buried brothel, where evidence shows gladiators found momentary reprieve from their bloody fate in the arena.
So we entered this whole building upstairs
Yes.
and walked on a Roman street upstairs.
That's right.
Now we're underneath that street.
Yes.
And these are each individual structures.
They much probably, 90-95%, has been considered an area where, gladiators and even others, they could come and enjoy to have sex with, women that they were disposed to sell their bodies.
So we're in the red light district.
That's right, good work.
The ruins of Rione Terra are actually several layers of history spanning 500 years. The first layer is made of an ancient Roman neighborhood, including streets, shops, and homes. That neighborhood was built on top of an ancient cistern from the Greek times. When the Romans occupied this area, they turned these cisterns into basements, including the brothel. The brothel is about the size of a city block, with about a dozen rooms. After Rome collapsed and several centuries of rebuilding, the modern city was built on top, burying the ancient one.
So this was where the gladiators would come to...
Yes, the gladiators, of course, would also come here because they were always in danger that they could have died during that day or the next day. So at least they could have embraced the woman that they liked in this area before saying goodbye to this life.
We're talking about a buried brothel. It
Right.
wasn't necessarily something they would want out into the general public.
Yes, hidden by other eyes that could have known who was going there.
Well, it was a good business practice.
Prostitution in ancient Rome was legal, and prostitutes were registered with the state, even taxed. Most of them were slaves, and conditions in the brothels were usually extremely unsanitary. Many died living in places like this because of disease. But that didn't keep Roman men from all walks of life from frequenting these underground dens. Even though gladiators were themselves slaves, they were also incredibly valuable to their managers and were given special freedoms to fulfill their urges.
On each door at the entrance,
Yeah.
there could have been a particular position that the woman was able to offer.
A position,
A position, a love position.
a sexual position.
Sexual position, that's
Would
right.
have been advertised.
Advertising on the wall, if you come, I also like to do that.
Okay.
So you could choose here instead of going over there. They used to consider this area the Las Vegas of nowadays. Yeah.
So what happens in Puteoli stays in Puteoli.
But this wasn't the only brothel in ancient Rome. In fact, similar drawings of sexual positions were found in the ruins of nearby Pompeii. Another room in the corner of the brothel still contains graffiti that Antimo says was likely drawn here by a prostitute thousands of years ago. An advertisement to her customers that gladiators were among her most satisfied clients.
So this is, I can see, it's very vague, but there is a gladiator's helmet rendered right here. And sure enough, to the right of that, another one right here. I mean, you can imagine, I guess, that all along this wall would have been essentially an advertisement.
That's right. Then, yeah.
Yes, I have gladiators as my customers. Congratulations, you're in the same place. So if I was just some Joe Schmo walking around and I was thinking about what prostitute to go to, and I saw that she has gladiators in here, I'm thinking, this woman's pretty good.
Yeah.